Now, these by-elections are not blips. They're not one-offs. There have been plenty of them that have all been dreadful for you. You've been behind in the polls for many, many months. Whatever you try, it's not working, is it?
Well, I agree with what Robert said just a few moments ago. There's no doubt that these by-elections were set against a very difficult backdrop. I was in Kingswood myself a few weeks ago. I saw that the excellent candidate and the campaign on the ground. But actually, if you look at it, if you look at, for example, Reform's vote, which people have been talking about this week, what comes across to me is it's very clear that a vote for Reform is actually a vote to let Labour in. And that is a very clear message that I've taken away. One of the clear messages that I've taken away from these by-elections.
But the clear message is that...
The message that I've taken at these by-elections is people hate me so much, they're willing to let somebody from the other party into power just to hurt me. Our party have failed so much, not just in governance, but in terms of actually appealing to the people who support our politics. They don't even want to vote for us anymore, and will let someone further away from their politics get in power just to make us sad. Like, that's not like a ringing endorsement of your political party now, is it, Mr. Tomlinson?
Voters don't like what Rishi Sunak is offering them. And it's not just the last week. They've been Somerton and Frome in the southwest, Selby and Ainsty in the north, Tamworth in the Midlands, Bedfordshire in the southeast. This is a long line of kickings since Rishi Sunak has been in. Voters don't want what he's offering.
Well, as I said, these have been very difficult circumstances and a difficult backdrop. You mentioned by-elections. Governments don't traditionally win by-elections. That is absolutely right. We saw the turnout in the by-elections very different from the sort of turnout that you get at a general election. We're in the 30s or thereabouts for the by-elections, much higher, likely to be the 60s or hopefully towards the 70s in a general election.
And yet Labour still increased their vote share, even though way fewer people even turned up to the vote there. And not just even the vote share, the number of votes. Labour got more votes in the by-election at 37% turnout than they got in the general election at 60-odd% turnout. That's bad for you. It's bad for the country too, because both these parties are going to be terrible in government. But it's definitely bad for the Conservative Party if Labour, even on half turnout, are still getting more votes than they did at a general election. And again, that's true, Sarah and chat as well. How are you having a legal immigration minister? Asylum seekers aren't even illegal. They're just irregular because they have to arrive by regular means to then claim asylum. The number of migrants who are actually illegal is very, very, very small. But again, because they can name the ministers basically whatever they want, that's why we have a levelling up minister and a minister for common sense. It just gets this weird position where ministerial roles aren't made for the act of governance because the Conservative Party are not interested in the act of governance. They are interested in winning elections and taking public money and giving it to their mates. Right? That's what they're there for. They're not there for the good of the country. They're not there to govern. They are governing because what governing is what gives them the power to make money for them and the people who donate to their party. So they don't create ministerial roles for some utility of governance. They create it as a rhetorical tactic to try and win another election. The illegal immigration minister is not doing anything. He's just there to make it look like they're doing things about the nasty brown people coming across the channel. In the same way the levelling up minister is there to make it look like they fulfilled a manifesto pledge when they haven't.
It has been a very difficult backdrop, but one of the messages that I've received, as I said, is in relation to reform. A vote for reform just simply lets Labour in.
But that's not a message from voters. That's voters choosing to go somewhere else because they don't like what you have been putting on the table. And more than a year ago, Rishi Sunak said, judge me on my actions. Judge me on his famous pledges that he put forward. It looks like people are doing exactly what he asked them to. They're judging him and they're judging that he's failing.
Well, let's look at those pledges. And the first pledge was in relation to inflation. And everyone said it was an ambitious pledge, an ambitious plan.
There was no hierarchy to the pledges. There was no specific, this is our main one, and the rest of them were all kind of sub-pledges. No, they were all cast iron pledges that they said they were going to hit. How many of them have you hit? Just 1 out of 5. 20% hit rate. Although, to be fair, we've got Keir Starmer here who's broken 9 out of his 10 pledges, so...
Well, hang on, the Bank of England had already forecast it was going to fall. So it was not seen at the time as if something was completely impossible.
Laura, respectfully, there were doubters. There was a time where people doubted that the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, would actually meet his ambition, his pledge. He did that. 11.1% it was back in 2022. Now at 4%, well, more than matching.
Let's then look at the other.
Of course, again, the thing you've got to contend with is that that's how cost-push inflation works. The whole reason they made that pledge is because they knew that inflation would have dropped because the supply chain shocks would have gone through the economy. That's the whole reason why they made that pledge in the way that they did, because they knew it would come down because it had to. I had people in my TikTok comments saying, oh, actually, the Bank of England interest rates, they stopped the inflation. No, they did not. Inflation changes because of interest rate rises is usually like a year and a half after the fact. Sometimes even longer to see the effects of interest rate rises throughout the rest of the economy. And inflation was already dropping like a year ago.
We're in recession. He pledged to grow the economy. We're in recession. Debt is not falling, it is growing. The boats haven't stopped, and hospital waiting lists are getting longer.
Well, let me take those. In relation to growing the economy, the biggest stumbling block, if you like, the biggest barrier to growing the economy is having high inflation. So we're seeing that moving in the right direction with predictions that there will be growth in the future from the OBR, from the OECD, from the Bank of England, the IMF and others, predicting that there will be growth that will grow faster than France, Italy, Germany and Japan.
But you know too, it's
But we're also still in a worse position based on where we were before the pandemic. And that position was also one of wage stagnation, also one of reduced living standards, the biggest drop in living standards now since the Napoleonic Wars, and we're still not back to where we were pre-pandemic. The United States, though, big expansionary fiscal program, no austerity like we got here, they're back to where they were pre-pandemic levels, and they're still rising ahead of inflation in some cases for lower quartile wages. Inflation's still come down there because they didn't do the stupid thing of taking all the money out of the economy.
It's predicted to be very, very measly. And I suppose the question I'm really asking you is about Rishi Sunak essentially sort of offered a contract to the public, didn't he? As the new Prime Minister taking over after the chaos of Liz Truss. He said, trust me with these 5 things I am going to do for you. And on several of them, things have been going in the wrong direction. Voters have clocked that and they are judging him harshly.
Laura, the task that he set me is the 5th, the final one of those pledges that you mentioned, stopping the boats. That has been the challenge that he has set me. That's my job title, if you like. And look at last year. Look at what happened. We saw boats crossings down by over a third, 16,000 fewer people getting across. You're right, the job is not yet done. We still have, for example, the deterrent effect that we need to put in, the Rwanda bill. We'll see that tomorrow coming back to the House of Lords in committee stage, and then it's got to come through to report stage. And when that comes back to the House of Commons, and when we make that law, as I believe that we will, that's when...
I mean, you gotta wait for the House of Lords to actually do the one job that they have. They don't do many things, but this is literally their one job, is to stop us breaking international law. So I don't really have much faith in this Conservative plurality House, but we shall see. The fact that we have to rely on people like Ken Clarke, absolute arseholes like Ken Clarke, to be the bastions of protecting liberal democracy, just shows you how far we've come, doesn't it? Shows you how far I've come. I have to rely on Ken Clarke. Ooh, it makes me wince just to say those words.
When we can ratify the treaty and make sure that we can get planes off the ground, because the deterrent effect can and will work.
You hope. There is no firm evidence that it definitively will. And before you perhaps give the metaphor, the illustration of Australia, which the former Home Secretary Suella Braverman did, Australia is a completely different geographical setup. There is nothing guaranteed about a deterrent effect coming from you actually getting planes to Rwanda, if indeed you are actually able to do that. And you mentioned there progress on the boats, except if you look at
And also, how about the Rwanda plan is anti-humanitarian, internationally illegal nonsense based upon laws that they wrote to legislate reality, despite the fact Rwanda is clearly not a safe country? Any of those claims there, Laura, or are we just going to talk about the fact that it's not going to be a deterrent, or that it's going to be too expensive? Are we back to the Labour Together line on this one, are we, Laura? No human rights implications whatsoever. I don't care about the human rights implications.
the Home Office's own figures, your department, January 2023, 1,180 migrants arrived. January 2024, 1,223. So actually it's up slightly if you look at the details.
Well, let's take those one at a time. You mentioned Australia. Let me mention another country beginning with A, Albania. The Prime Minister secured a deal back in December 2022 with Albania. And what did we see last
Every time, always back to Albania.
year? Crossings down by 90%. Those coming from Albania trying to get on board on small boats down by 90%. So the deterrent effect, you mentioned Australia, Albania, it has worked.
The thing is, the Albania crossings were coming down even before the returns agreement was filed. And again, it's different when people come over from Albania, a country that is usually a safe country, and not when they're coming from Syria and Afghanistan, countries ruled by the Taliban and in civil war literally right now. Kind of a different case. But we want to treat Albanian asylum seekers like they're the same as people coming from Syria and Afghanistan, when the fact that we want to deport Syrian refugees to Rwanda for the crime of being too brown to come here, ridiculous.
In terms of the figures, they are coming down. We need to see those figures coming down even further. Laura, my mission is, I believe, a moral mission. We have seen in every one of the past 3 months people drowning in the Channel. The criminal gangs the people smugglers, they...
Whoa, I can't believe that they feel the need to come in small boats. Incredible how when the Ukrainians and people from Hong Kong come here, they've got safe and legal routes that they can access. They can get their claims processed outside the country and then come here as soon as their claim has been processed very quickly and efficiently. Don't you think it's weird? People coming here from Eritrea, coming from Sudan, people coming here from Iran and Iraq. Do you think it's weird how these people don't have those same routes to access? And therefore have to go in the boats because there's no safe and legal route? Don't you find that a bit weird, chat?
They want to pack as many people onto those flimsy boats that I saw 48 hours ago when I was over in France speaking to my French counterparts and seeing the work that they are doing to help us in our joint mission to stop the boats. The criminal gangs do not care if you're going to live or die. It is a moral imperative that we resolve. We have made progress, we must make more.
But that might be why a lot of our viewers hearing this morning that there's almost exactly the same number in January 24 as there were 23. It's actually gone slightly up. Again, it's not working what you're trying to do.
Well, I think it's difficult to say, look at 1 month's figures or a few weeks' figures and try and compare that. If you look at the whole year, this is what I'm trying to say, Laura. If you look at the whole of last year, when there were predictions that the crossings would skyrocket, they would double, no, they went down. And when you look at crossings, for example, into Europe, to Italy, they were up 80%, and yet we have managed. The plan is working. And this is the challenge. Are you going to stick with the plan that is working with the Prime Minister, or are you going to go back to square one with Labour?
But the Prime Minister...
But the plan, it literally isn't working. Not even by your own metrics, or by the metrics of people who aren't absolutely abhorrent moral stains on humanity. By our metrics, all you're doing is trying to drown more people in the channel by not opening safe and legal routes, or having a processing centre in France so they can have their claims held and then come here by some regular route. Yet your route of try and ship people off to a country you know isn't safe but that you legislate to be safe anyway, you're failing on that metric too, because you're not passing the law, and on top of that it won't work, and on top of that it's only 200 people that you're sending, and on top of that all of the criminals then come back here.
His promise to the public was to stop the votes. It was not stop the votes, rather than stopping the votes. Seems to be actually what's happening at by-elections. People are stopping their votes for the Conservatives.
That's right.
But his promise was to stop the votes. That is not happening.
That has not happened yet. That is a challenge and the task that he has set me. The figures are moving in the right direction. There is more that we must do. I was in France 48 hours ago, seeing our partnership work there. That is working. We must work upstream as well, making sure that the boats don't get there. Even when I was in France, we saw one of those boats that was on its way to try and make one of those perilous journeys being seized. The plan is working. We need to stick with the plan.
Well, our viewers will make their own judgment about whether or not it is working. I want to ask you about...
I'm not going to ask about safe and legal routes, are you? Again, we literally, as Solarfrag ports out in chat, we literally had Suella Braverman in a parliamentary select committee being asked what a safe and legal route to come to the UK as an asylum seeker coming from sub-Saharan Africa, for example, and she couldn't answer how they would claim asylum because there is no legal route for them to do so. They have to arrive via irregular means. We know this, and yet no journalist mentions it, and they are absolutely doing a dereliction of their duties by not mentioning it.
A specific part of your job at the Home Office, a different bit. Now, there were 22,000 asylum seekers who arrived here between March and July last year. They're not eligible to be sent to Rwanda because the legislation, the new law, would only apply from July, nor can they legally claim asylum. So they are stuck. Was it a mistake to create that loophole?
No, listen, what's happened is that there's been a decision to pause, and I think that is right. We've had the Supreme Court judgment last year. It was on the 15th of November. And it's right, I think, that the government and the Home Secretary and I have the opportunity to pause and reflect. That's what's happening now. I mentioned the bill and the treaty. The treaty was signed last year on the 5th of December. The bill is going through Parliament.
These are people to whom that new law you want to pass does not apply. There are more than 20,000 people stuck in a legal limbo because of this loophole that the government's law has created. What are you going to do with them?
Well, Laura, that's not quite right, because as I was explaining, the bill, when it comes in, means that there...
But it's crazy that the question that she's asking here is, what are you going to do with all the illegals, Mr. Michael Tomlinson, illegal immigration minister? And not indeed, you know, all of those children that you lost? You know, all of those people who are in asylum limbo, that your government, the children that you lost, almost certainly being sold into slavery right now. 200, so I don't know if you know this, chat, Raiders, who are American, you might not know this, but in our asylum system at the moment, there's quite a long backlog because of austerity cuts from the asylum processing system. And there were 200 children who were part of the queue to have their asylum claims heard, and they just were lost. The government lost 200 children. And it got mentioned like a couple of times in like the papers, forgotten about, immediately forgotten about, completely ignored by the mainstream press, completely ignored that 200 children went missing under the care of the state. Wards of the state just completely went missing and no one mentions it.
There is the solution in relation to Rwanda. It means that we can get planes off the ground. And so we need to get that bill to come through. But to directly answer your question, it was the right thing to do to reflect on the Supreme Court judgment of the 15th of November. The government responded with the treaty and with the bill. That is coming through Parliament. It's back in the House of Lords tomorrow. And we need to get that on the statute books.
But are you suggesting that when that law is passed, it will also apply to these people who are stuck in limbo?
That is exactly right. The Rwanda plan means that planes will be able to take off the ground and it will include those who are already here. That is exactly right.
Okay.
What happened to all those children? We don't know. They were never found. They're probably been sold into slavery or working. Yeah, it doesn't bear thinking about.
Except that there are people...
Hey there, if you enjoyed the video, make sure that you like and leave a comment. That helps the video out in the algorithm. If you subscribe and ring the bell, it'll let you know when I go live. I stream every day on YouTube and Twitch. You can also follow all of my socials down in the description. And if you want to support me in a more financial manner, there's a join button for memberships. It's just 99p to be a member on YouTube, as well as a Patreon, and there's some merch there as well. And hopefully I'll catch you on the next video. Take care.